Whether you're crafting a sweeping epic fantasy or a utopian novel or a small town with quirky secrets, world building is the foundation that gives your story depth and makes it really believable. So how do you build the worlds that surround the story you're trying to tell? Well, in this video, I'm going to provide you some tips for creating worlds within your novels. Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm your book coach and developmental editor, and I help women unapologetically write, edit, and publish stories that inspire and create positive impact in this world. So world building doesn't mean that you need to write these long sections of expose and these in-depth descriptions of where we are to get the sense of time and place when your story is taking place. And it's also not about having to create like this huge map about your book and where we are to orient people, unless of course that's something that is super helpful for your book. It's about creating a world that feels real enough for your characters to be living and breathing in. And your readers are brought in and they understand the rules of the world, they understand how it operates, they can visualize it, and they feel as if they can jump right into it. So how do you actually create this in a way that feels very authentic and doesn't take readers out of the story because they're questioning like, wait, what is this detail? Or I thought this thing worked like this. We don't want confused readers. We want to be able to provide them all of this information so they can focus and enjoying the story you're telling. So the first tip is really to start with what's relevant. So I invite you, if you are creating a world that is different than the one we live in or is very specific to what it is that we know and experience in our day-to-day life now, I would mind dump or brain dump as much of that as possible, all the details that are important or significant or you've thought of onto a piece of paper. Then from there, you can hone in on what it is that makes your story unique. So when you're writing, we don't need to know every single detail that you've mind dumped on the page, but you want to isolate the things that are going to be the most important for the reader to know and understand. So you want to focus on the elements that are going to impact your story the most. So you can do this by asking yourself these questions. So where does your story take place? This is a very important one to really understand where it takes place. You can also ask yourself, what are the cultural, political, and environmental details that shape your character's life? And this one is a really important one to think about is what rules or norms are different from the real world that we live in now. So when you can isolate what is different, you can then go deeper into your descriptions of really telling the reader and showing them how this operates in the world that you've created. So by focusing on what's relevant, this really helps you create a structure for your story without having to slow it down these long pieces of expose or info dumping. So the second tip is to anchor the extraordinary in the familiar. So even if you are creating very different worlds and there's all these different things that the reader does need to know in order to understand how this world operates, you want to be able to anchor that into what it is that we know in the world that we live in. So a floating city out in the world or out in the universe somewhere is going to feel very real if people are still bickering over breakfast in the morning or if they're gossiping at their book club. So you want to still have a connection to our shared human experience, even if it is in this different world. We need to feel like we're anchored and can still relate to the people who are operating in this world. So by using familiar emotions, routines, and relationships, that can help us anchor back into this shared human experience. So the third tip for creating worlds is to make sure that you have a sense of history. So you're not just creating the world as it is now, as we are experiencing it as readers. We want to understand there is a history. There's a sense of like, how did we get to this world? So we need to have a backstory for your world building. So it's likely that your world didn't just like appear one day. So it's really about where are you in the space and time of your story starting and how much of this world has been in existence prior to the start of your story. So you can do this by even just like hinting at past events, if it were wars or maybe there was a big separation between the earth that we live on now and where your book is taking place. Maybe there's certain inventions or just any key historical events that might have taken place that really show significance as to why we are where we are in your world. So you don't need a full timeline. I think it might be helpful for you as the writer to write out that timeline just so you are clear on it. But within your book, you can just share what is most relevant and what is most important. And you can do this just by suggesting things or people mentioning it or recalling or learning about an event. It's just enough to suggest that the world you have created has been lived in for a while before your characters can show up and have their experience within this world. So the next tip to consider when building your world is the language, the culture, and the belief systems. So how do people speak in this world? What are some of their belief systems? How does day-to-day life look? What is kind of the laws and universal things that people are obeying and responding to? Are there any myths or customs or taboos that influence the culture? So these details not only kind of enrich the world or the setting that you're building, but it can also reveal a lot around character motivation and also their reaction to things that are happening. So you don't need to create a whole new language, but playing with idioms or greetings or even slang is just a fun way to add a little bit more texture. So another tip is to really consider the geography and the climate. So if you are creating a floating city out in the universe, like what is the weather like? Does it tend to be really windy, or is it kind of tucked in this corner behind other planets where it doesn't get as windy? Little things like that can really determine, again, how your characters are going to move through the world that you have created. It might be a very deserty type climate. So like, is there water scarcity? It might be raining a lot. So like, what does that mean for the tropical landscape? Or is it tropical? Is there thick brush? Is there a bunch of trees? Like, what does that look like? And then ultimately, how does that impact, again, the way your character moves through that world? So the last tip for building your world is don't be afraid to evolve. So while we are jumping into this world that you've created for the snapshot of time for when your book is taking place, we also want to see how it evolves through that time of the story and potentially how it will evolve for the future. Your world can and probably should shift a little bit as you are writing your book. So let your characters uncover maybe hidden truths or challenge what they know or stumble upon places that surprises even you as you are writing this. So stay open to kind of adjusting your world as you are learning more about it, as you are writing, so you can better support your characters and your reader as they are immersed in this world. So world building isn't about perfection. It's really about creating a living backdrop that enhances your story and can be an asset for you as your character is coming up against maybe the beliefs or cultural norms within their world, so that they are then growing and transforming in a way that is going to help move your story forward and creates maybe even a different or better world than it was when you first started your book. So again, as much as you can map out before you start writing your story so that you really understand your world, the history of how that world came to be, and then you can highlight what is most relevant for your readers to know so they can feel immersed in there without having to sit there and question like, wait, what does that look like? What does that feel like? I don't quite understand. We want to make sure that we're putting the most relevant information in front of your readers so that they understand exactly what is most important to know, and so they can feel oriented in your story and really focus on that journey and that story you're telling them. So if you enjoyed this, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.